I'm an anxious person in general, and I wish that, maybe I don't wish, but it feels like I wish that I was in a place where I didn't care what anybody thought, but I also feel like if you're gonna make television, that's a pretty masochistic position to have. You should just write novels and then burn the novels upon completion if you don't care what anybody else thinks. For me, this time around, it was less about whether or not people think it's good or not, and more about are they going to be emotionally affected by it. And so I just set that metric for myself and my own gratification, and we felt really happy about the way that the show as a whole went.
The man told me that 7 years earlier he was in a supermarket and every single person disappeared except for him.
It was super important for us that Nora's story was so believable that when Kevin says to her that he believes her, and why wouldn't he, that the audience believed him. And that was really what we were reaching for. And I will just say that in spite of whatever our intention may or may not have been, when we were standing on the set in Clunes, Australia, with Mimi directing and Carrie sitting in her chair and Justin sitting in his, she finished her monologue and I turned to Tom and I said, I believe her. So I think we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think whether or not her story is literally true, I think if it is a story, it's a story that reflects some true insight that she had about the possibility of rejoining her kids, which is why we believe her. We believe her the way we believe a good piece of fiction, which is it tells the truth too.
You know, we talked about keeping the performance very grounded and very real. And in terms of her being naked, you come into the world naked, you go out naked, alone. And it was very important that the frontal nudity exist, that she be naked. It just had to be. And she was game completely. And, you know, there's a lot of ways of shooting naked. And, you know, we did it very simply and very beautifully and honestly. And as she did everything in the episode, I mean, just, you know, the dancing, there's dancing and then there's, you know, falling into, you know, someone's heart. And, you know, I wanted them to feel as if they were dancing for the very first time. And so it was a very important moment to kind of figure out, which they did. And they're beautifully astounding actors.
I think it's hard to paint The Leftovers with a brush of it's pessimistic or it's optimistic or it's sad or it's happy. I think, you know, Tom's book was all of the above, and we wanted the show to reflect the same ideas. But ultimately, his book ended with this moment of Nora finding a baby on a porch and saying, look what I found, with a smile on her face. And that basically became the blueprint for the way that we wanted to end all the seasons of the show, including the final one, which is you're going to suffer, but there is grace at the end of suffering. There's a purpose, and I think that's not just applicable to the characters, but it's also applicable to the audience who's watching the show. It's if you're gonna watch all 3 seasons of The Leftovers, you're gonna suffer, but there is grace at the end of your suffering.